How's it going, Aaron? It's great to get you on the podcast. It's been a few months. It's been like what, 6 months probably at this point since you were last on.
I believe so. Yeah, it's great to be back.
Yeah, absolutely. The last time we had a fantastic conversation, and I typically try to not have people on, twice in the same year, right? But I felt like we had so much more to talk about, right? That we could absolutely have you back on sooner. So I appreciate, you coming back on, and we're going to talk about everything, SaaS security, Salesforce. There's a new Salesforce report out that we're going to dive into. So I'm definitely excited for our conversation.
Yeah, me too. It's an absolute pleasure to be back.
Yeah. So Aaron, why don't you, maybe just refresh my audience's, memory of your quick background, right? Just, what's your specialty, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm the chief of SaaS security research at AppOmni. So my niche is in SaaS security, as is alluded to in my title. So specifically focusing on the SaaS platforms that are like powering the enterprise globally. So if you're not familiar, that's what those are. We're talking about like Salesforce, ServiceNow, like Oracle, NetSuite, Workday, those cloud systems is what I kind of focus on. And really my specialty area is in identifying misconfigurations or potential for customers to misconfigure these platforms in a way that reduces their security posture. So I do a lot of, 0-day kind of research, but it's mostly figuring out and identifying if a customer regresses in some access control, or if they enable some configuration, how is that reducing the overall security of their environment, and how could that be exploited by an attacker?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I feel like there's still a notion of SaaS apps being like a very highly secure, path forward, right? And I feel like people that don't really look into it, that aren't, security experts in the field, it's difficult for them to grasp that, right? Because you're putting all of your trust in this application that you're using every single day, for the most part. I mean, like Salesforce, for instance, right? I mean, what company doesn't have Salesforce?
Yeah.
And what company is also looking at Salesforce from like a security risk perspective, right? Like I was working for a large automotive manufacturer, based out of Germany. So you can narrow it down right there to three, right? And they have a giant Salesforce presence, right? Globally. Because whatever Germany buys, the rest of the globe is going to, take and deploy and everything else, right? Because Germany is over there negotiating these insane deals with vendors. And, a year into this role, my CISO says, "Oh, hey, you should go look at Salesforce. Like, we don't know what's going on over there."
Mhm.
Like, what are you
Yeah.
talking about? We don't know what's going on over there, And I found out, I mean, 20% of what the security team knew about Salesforce was like completely wrong, or they only knew about 20% of what was going on.
Yeah, that is extremely typical. Generally, what we see is that security folks within an organization are forgetting what the shared responsibility model is. And so they have this preconceived notion that it's like, well, it's on Salesforce to secure Salesforce, right? And it's like, well, it's not that clear cut, because Salesforce is responsible for the security of their software. It's proprietary software. So if you've got like a SQL injection out of the box that like the second you buy a Salesforce instance is there, then it's like, yeah, that's on them to fix. So that's their job from a security perspective. What isn't their job is monitoring and auditing configurations that you as a customer make and customizations that you make on the platform. And this isn't just Salesforce, this is across the board, right? For ServiceNow, all these different SaaS platforms. If you decide that you want to delete every access control, like you can do that. That's what makes these platforms so powerful, and also, funnily enough, like so popular, is they're so customizable. It's like, hey, here's the platform. It can do all these amazing things, and you can build so much on it. You don't like our APIs, you can build your own APIs, and you can do whatever you want. And it's fantastic, but it's not the vendor's job to secure those APIs for you, right? They don't know what your use case is. They're not going to do any of that. So it's depending on who you ask, could be on the platform administrators, the guy who's got the system admin account on Salesforce, who's logging in every day. Could be their job. Could be the job of the actual like red teams right, to kind of get up to scratch with the like access control model of these SaaS platforms and do their routine pen tests and things like that. There's also a bit of responsibility on the developers within these organizations. So if you've got a very big Salesforce presence, you've probably got people writing code on Salesforce because they have that on these platforms. They've got their own languages effectively, and by writing code, you can introduce security vulnerabilities there. So depending on the organization, the security of your platform, it could fall on one person, it could fall on multiple teams across different departments. It really does depend. But ultimately, most organizations aren't even necessarily getting that far. They're not even getting as far as like, well, who should we task with securing our SaaS platforms? It's more so, yeah, it's the vendor. I feel like as the past couple of years have gone by, where attackers are now focusing a hell of a lot more on SaaS platforms because of the very sensitive nature of the data being stored there, that it's been a bit of a wake up call to the internal security orgs being like, oh, we should really have visibility into like what's going on these platforms, right?
Yeah, it's interesting. Like one of the I wanted to ask you, one of the risks that you're always kind of told about, right, is protecting yourself from proprietary storage methods or like proprietary storage formats of your data. Is that even a real thing in SaaS apps?
Not
I feel like
not
it's not, because that would be such a huge like lawsuit for these SaaS companies. It's like, oh, I can't pull my data out and transfer it to somewhere else, like,
I'm not gonna point fingers at any particular vendor or anything, but I can speak to how easy they make it to kind of get off platform. Um, it is interesting because you do have you know people on LinkedIn, these thought leaders saying, oh, like everyone's now switching back to like on-prem because it's cheaper and like all of these things. So I mean, I can't speak to how easy it is to get the data off, but as far as issues go, I haven't heard a ton around that. I don't think it's as big of a problem as it necessarily was back in the day.
Hmm. Yeah, the the thought leaders that are saying that companies are moving back to on-prem, I feel like they'll be back. Like whenever I hear that, it's like I feel like you're going to be right back. You guys forgot about the pain of having on-prem infrastructure, running your own data centers and everything. Like that's a huge pain. You have to have whole teams around that.
Yeah, and I mean, software development's changed so massively that it's like I'm sure the up and coming generations will be like, well, how did Mark Zuckerberg build Facebook without Kubernetes and like
Right.
serverless functions and like Lambda and all this stuff? But yeah, I think SaaS is never going to go away, right?
Yeah.
I've heard ramblings on LinkedIn about, well, with all of this new like AGI stuff coming in, like, why do we really need SaaS platforms anymore? However, these SaaS platforms are actually building their own AI, right?
Right.
In terms of you got like Agentforce for Salesforce, and they're moving with the times. And the unique thing about them doing that, and what makes that so powerful, and what will keep customers on those platforms, is that those agents have domain knowledge, right? And that's the key differentiator. Like Agentforce being on the platform has domain knowledge. Like it doesn't apply off platform for other AGI. So that's another thing to think about. I think we're in an interesting time where there's being just a massive shift in how organizations are looking at SaaS and their usage of SaaS, especially incorporating, as I said, like AI into that. But when it comes to overall security, I think it could be forgotten about a little bit. Everyone's focusing on like, do more with AI, we'll do more. And it's like, well, you still gotta have a platform to protect, right? And ultimately, all you're doing is, yeah, you're getting a whole host of benefits by utilizing AI, but at the same time, you're also introducing another attack vector. So if again you are not putting security at the forefront of your mind when building these agents and granting access controls to these agents on your SaaS platforms, you're just it's going to be a bad time for sure.
Yeah, so why don't we kind of circle back to what agentic AI agents are? I feel like that's such a new term that a lot of people may not even realize what it is, and we're already interacting with it.
Yeah, well, are you talking about like in respect to SaaS or?
Yeah, just talking about, like Salesforce's solution that you just mentioned, right? Like, what's the purpose of it? Am I like, if I go to Expedia and book a trip, right? I go into their platform. Am I now going through this AI agent that is booking the trip most efficiently for whatever parameters I give it, or just what does that look like?
So generally speaking, like the biggest difference, if I can sum it up, like the most important difference is previously we were more familiar with generative AI, which is like you give it a single prompt and it'll just give you like a single response, right? With agentic AI, you are giving it a you can give it a high level prompt, right? Like a minimal high level prompt, and it will, with little to no human interaction, start performing all of these tasks. So it effectively is going to break down what you're asking for into like subtasks, right? So if you've got, for example, like a high level task, like, hey, I need you to, within an organization, I need you to kind of balance like the inventory of my stock or whatever else. It'll look at that and it will then be like, okay, here's what I need to do. I need to break it down into all of these steps in order to fulfill this kind of, I guess, task execution. So it's effectively running with like zero human oversight. Generative AI, like you had human oversight for each like prompt or each output that the generative AI was giving you. Whereas with agentic AI, you're kind of going run with this, and you might give it like a little bit of exception handling guidance, like, oh, if something's wrong, like do this. But generally, those are the biggest differences. Agentic AI's main focus is the completion of tasks with like a high level prompt, and like very little human oversight with respect to what it gives back to you. And that's just the contrast to generative AI.
Hmm. Okay, that makes sense. So where do you start with securing something like that?
Yeah. Well, it depends. I can really speak to SaaS platforms, right? Because that's where my expertise lies. But when we're looking at, you've got an agentic AI agent, right? And you wanted to fulfill some task, such as like maybe you have a customer that wants to like file a case. There's some issue, and so the agentic AI needs to first look at the problem, assess the priority, the impact, file it in the necessary place, and assign it to the necessary people. And in order to do that, it needs to have some level of access, right, um, to those places in the platform, right? It needs to be able to see, okay, who can I assign this to? Who are these people internally? What's their function? Are they relevant to finding a solution for this case? And they need to be able to create and write data because they need to put the case ticket information somewhere. And so the first place that would be looking at is the access controls that you are giving this agent. It needs to be completely minimal with respect to like least privilege, right? And that comes back to the whole like, zero trust, right, model, like operating with complete least privilege, because the last thing that you want is an overprivileged AI agent that gets some prompt injection, right, gets tricked by a malicious actor into fetching some unrelated information like PII or something. And that can only happen when it has access to those PII records, right? That's the meat of securing these agents for SaaS. It is enforcing least privilege, following that kind of zero trust model. And as a result, by doing that, you are minimizing your exposure to attacks like prompt injection. You know, there's only so much, even in the scenario of a successful prompt injection payload, there's only so much that the agent can do. And so as a result, the blast radius and impact is massively reduced. Now, that being said, like I've seen some pretty intense implementations on on SaaS platforms, where you've got like one agent communicating with another agent. And so it's like fanning out these tasks, and it's almost like doing its own assignment to like other agents. And so when you start getting these more complex architectures where you've got multiple agents doing that manually, that kind of auditing of permissions and, you know, ensuring there's no like permission drift is going to be a very difficult task, right? Because the more components, whether it's agents, whether it's APIs, the more components that you start building, the larger your attack surface gets. So it's really important that where possible, manually audit the access controls on the platform with respect to AI. But I would recommend that if you are like an enterprise organization, to get like an automated monitoring and scanning tool, like like AppOmni, like an SSPM that can continuously assess the security of those agents.
Hmm. And so how, I mean, I have like two questions, right? I want to dive into the Salesforce report. The other part is how does AppOmni, get that visibility? Because at least from my side, right? I haven't really used a SaaS security solution before. I've needed to, right? And so I only see the SaaS platform as a security engineer, security expert, right? That's looking at the platform from basically like an admin perspective. And I have
Yeah.
to go through all these different menus and everything to try and piece everything together. How is AppOmni plugging itself in to show like the hierarchy of these agents and the security of the platform overall?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's kind of multiple aspects to the product, right? And to like an SSPM in general. And starting from really the bottom is typically speaking, for getting your customer who has, let's say, a Salesforce organization, right? So you're going to connect over API using like OAuth or even like certificate-based authentication, depends on the platform. The customer will have created an integration account for AppOmni. So that integration account has the necessary roles for us to access various kinds of data, And so we then start to ingest anything security related from a metadata perspective. So when I say like a metadata perspective, we are not going to be pulling in like password hashes, that kind of stuff over API. We start to pull into our platform things such as like role-based access controls, any configuration settings related to security, audit logs, like access logs, like those kind of things. We'll even pull in some cases, we can even pull in like code components and analyze those. So it really depends on the platform, but generally speaking, in terms of connecting over OAuth, there's some other form of secure authentication, and we're ingesting those over either existing out of the box APIs the platform provides, or in some cases, if the data, for example, with NetSuite in the past, they weren't exposing third-party applications over API. So we had to deploy custom APIs on our customers' environments, their NetSuite environments, that would expose that information for us. So once we have ingested all of that information, the first thing that you're really getting without anything else happening is like a single pane of glass, like eagle eye view of your entire platform from a security perspective, because we're consolidating all of these security controls and your user role assignments and all of these things, your access controls, effectively onto like a couple of pages, right? As opposed to, or even just a couple of tabs, as opposed to, as you said, you're like, okay, permission sets, click, profiles, and you're trying to piece all of the access controls together. So you've now got this very comprehensive, complete inventory of anything security related on AppOmni. So you log into AppOmni, or you can interact with it over API, but just for argument's sake, you log into AppOmni, you've got your immediately you've got a full inventory of anything access control related. You've got your audit logs there, right? You've got your third-party app connections. You've got all of these things, and so that's the inventory piece done. Okay. Now from there is where really like the real benefit of an SSPM comes in, and that's really where myself and like my team come in. And it's like, well, now that we have all of this metadata, let's start analyzing it and surfacing the issues to our customers. So using what we call AppOmni Insights, which is these are just continuous scans that we do against this data. We surface varying problems, right? Like, okay, it could be as basic as you've got too many administrators. You've got no access controls on this Salesforce object, or you've got externally exposed data here. And so what we're doing there is we're becoming your SaaS experts. Like we're your SaaS experts, so you don't have to be. We can tell you what the risks are. All you need to do is look at the findings, click on them. We provide the remediation guidance, and you can just go in and make those changes yourself. So we're performing all these very, very complex scans against this data. You've also got the kind of monitoring piece, right? Monitoring and alerting, which is we're ingesting all of those access logs, and we've got rule sets that could be out of the box when you have AppOmni, could be varying rule sets that you want to apply or install that we provide to you, and those rules will run against your audit logs, right? And we also normalize all of our audit logs. So if you've got Salesforce connected, you've got ServiceNow, you've got all these platforms, we normalize that into a very consistent format. So straight away, that's a massive benefit because we ingest it and we can dump that normalized format into your SIM. like Splunk. But when it comes to the actual alerting piece, we know what to look for. We know what's suspicious. So we can say, hey, there's like a credential spring attack going on right now. Like, you need to like look at this and surface those alerts to our customers so they can be aware of potential attacks or suspicious activity, and then they have the information needed to take action on it. And that's really the simplest way I can put it when it comes to AppOmni on an SSPM. We're just connecting to your instance over a secure authentication method. You grant us the permissions that we need to interrogate the kind of security metadata. We pull those in and we give you an inventory of all your security related components, and then perform a lot of complex analysis on those various access control components.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's helpful to kind of just understand, how it's working under the hood. It's an area that not very many people like focus on.
Which is a massive shame, because I'll give you an example of really how dangerous it can be when you misconfigure access controls. And so a lot of my research that I've done in the past is related to data exposure. So sensitive data being exposed to the public internet, so completely unauthenticated. That's kind of my wheelhouse. And the thing about SaaS platforms that differ from pen testing, custom, in-house built applications, if you're doing a pen test on a custom app, right, it's got its own implementation for APIs and all these things. So that when you go and do another pen test against a different client, they're going to have a completely different set of features in their product and APIs and access control and things like that. So if you're an attacker, you have to like learn every little like application and system and figure out how to get in that way, which is very time consuming. Whereas SaaS, the benefit to an attacker is that all of the core components for Salesforce, for example, across all Salesforce customers are the same, right? So they've got the same APIs built in out of the box. So in the past, I have found cases in which with Salesforce, with ServiceNow, with NetSuite, with Microsoft Power Platform as well, if you misconfigure access controls to accidentally imply that unauthenticated individuals can see your data, there are these, in 80% of cases, undocumented out of the box APIs that are accessible from the outside world, from the public internet, where you can start to pull that data. So if you're an attacker, you can interrogate a SaaS platform like Salesforce and say, okay, I'm going to try and extract data from every single object or table it's telling me is available, and try to exfiltrate sensitive data that way. And the reason this is so important and why it's so lucrative to attackers is because, as I mentioned, those core API components that allow you to exfiltrate data will exist on every single SaaS customer like of that platform. So if you want to attack Salesforce and attempt data exfiltration, you can write a script that will just query every live Salesforce instance, and it'll send the same queries effectively, right? And you can do it really at scale. So that's why kind of the bug bounty people love it so much, because they're like, oh, I don't have to learn anything new. I can just point a script at a Salesforce instance and point the same one at another one and try and like find some data exposed. It's lucrative,
Wow.
But that's why it's such a shame that companies aren't paying as much attention to SaaS, because one, you've got all of that complex under the hood, like undocumented API stuff going on that you may not know about. And two, it's where your most sensitive data lives. That kind of brings me into the research paper that I released last month, and that was focusing on Salesforce Industry Cloud. Well, Salesforce Industry Clouds, I should say. It's plural. It's kind of an umbrella term. So to give you the background, I believe it was 2014, a company called Velocity were building these like Salesforce packages, right? So there were these bundles of code components that their Salesforce customers could install, and it was providing them with pre-built like low code solutions for their industry. So if your customer was in healthcare, there was one for healthcare, and it allowed you to build like workflows that were specific to healthcare and like healthcare portals, and I just made all of that very, very easy because it was all low code. And then I believe it was 2020 or 2021, Salesforce looked at that and said, hey, we love what you're doing, so we're going to buy you. So they bought the company and the solution and said, we're going to redo this a little bit, because you're doing everything from these code packages, and that doesn't work very nicely with the existing components on the platform. So we're going to take your solution and we're going to actually bake it into the core platform. And now it can interact with things a little cleaner. And that's where industry clouds are today. Industry clouds encompass 11 different clouds. So you've got like public sector solutions. I believe there's an automotive cloud, there's a health cloud, financial services cloud, all targeting specific industries. And so if you are a Salesforce, if you're a Salesforce shop and you are like a pharmaceutical company, you'll purchase Health Cloud to give you all these pre-built solutions related to healthcare. And so my research was focusing on potential misconfigurations and even vulnerabilities that exist within all these industry clouds. So I was looking at the actual underlying technology that was powering these 11 clouds. So it wasn't focusing on Health Cloud or anything like that. I was focusing on the underlying engine so that every issue I found applied to all of them. And so what I did was, and the reason I actually even started doing this was because at AppOmni, we've got nearly a third of our customers using one of these industry clouds. They're so widely adopted, and so that was kind of the catalyst to me even doing the research in the first place. And so what I did was I was analyzing all the different feature sets and access control implementations, everything, every security relevant aspect of the underlying engine powering these industry clouds. And I was documenting everything that I was seeing. And I was also working with our security contact over at Salesforce as I was doing this. So as I was going along and adding more things, adding more findings, I was communicating it with them and saying, hey, this is interesting. What do you think? Is this something you should harden? If so, well, here's my thoughts on how to harden it. It was a very collaborative effort because we partner very closely with Salesforce. And the takeaway from my research was that out of 20 findings, 5 of them were considered CVE worthy, right? 0 days, so to speak. Things that the customer couldn't really, for the most part, can't really fix themselves. And that's that shared responsibility model we're talking about. So for an example, one of these items that was assigned as CVE was like it was an authorization bypass. So that wasn't fixable by a customer. So Salesforce had to take that on. And then the other 15 items that I found were things that were labeled as potential misconfigurations. And so these are those items I was talking about where if you're a customer developing something on an industry cloud and using one of their features, if you don't configure it with security in mind, it would fall into that bucket of a potential misconfiguration. So these are kind of like best practices for industry cloud customers. And so I released like a 53-page white paper that goes really deep into each and every finding. So I talk about I give like an overview of every finding. I give like a proof of concept technically, because as a security practitioner, I would want to know, how would an attacker even do this? Are you just telling me that this is an issue? So it gives you like a full setup. So here's how to set this up, proof of concept, how to fix it, the risk, all of that, which is why it's 53 pages. And we released that in accordance with Salesforce. We gave Salesforce enough time to kind of roll out those CVEs and the patches. And once their customers were given sufficient time to install updated packages and things like that and address those concerns, we released the research paper. And Salesforce, in conjunction with us, released their own blog post accrediting us with the research. So the kinds of issues that I was finding when it comes to these industry clouds, they are very feature specific, because industry clouds has a lot of different ways of doing things, as it's a low code solution, right? But we're talking about things like bypassing encryption controls. So for example, if you've got an industry cloud kind of low code component accessing some data and it's encrypted, normally you shouldn't be able to see that. But there are workarounds in order to actually see the plain text values. There are ways of bypassing field level security. So it's maybe someone internally shouldn't be able to see how much everyone is making, but they should be able to see their list of staff or whatever. You could bypass that field level access control on that salary field and see that data. There was a myriad of issues. There was issues related to caching, in which you could bypass, or you could actually receive the data meant for another user. So it was a really weird one where you could build this kind of low code component in Industry Cloud that would fetch some record data. And once you execute that component to give you the data, if you had misconfigured your caching mechanism in Industry Clouds, the person who then makes the same query but has different levels of access will get your results. So if you're that first person, you're an admin, you're kind of screwed because some unauthenticated guy over there made the same query and just got your results. So there were tons of really, really interesting findings that really span across like a ton of different categories. Like the encryption related stuff, you've got authorization bypasses, you've got caching related issues. So it was a really, really interesting product to research. We've most importantly as well during that research process, as I was finding these items, we were releasing the actual automated scanning within our product for our customers, right? Because our customer security is our priority first. So if you're an AppOmni customer during this research, we were rolling out the scans long before the research was published. So that's kind of like a holistic view of what the research was, and the kind of areas that it delved into. But it was, yeah, really, really fruitful, extremely high risk findings. You got some 0 days in there and massive blast radius, right? As I said, nearly a third of our customers, our Salesforce customers, are using one of these industry clouds. So if that's any representation of what like the non-AppOmni customers are like, then it's a ton of organizations that are potentially affected.
Wow, that's really fascinating and quite impressive, honestly. How does that even happen? I mean, I don't want to put you on the spot, right? But how does that even happen internally, at a company like Salesforce, right? I would think Salesforce being the behemoth that it is in the industry, that it would have a pretty robust, like internal pen testing team that would be looking at it from the outside like a researcher like yourself would, right? And
Yes.
trying to pull this stuff apart. How does that even happen where this is going unfound, undetected at their side?
Yeah. So when we look at the CVEs specifically, like the 0 days, because that's really like their responsibility for finding. Well, like put it this way. So you're Salesforce and you purchase all of these little bundle code components from Velocity, right? Number one, like you don't necessarily have, you've got Salesforce, all the security guys at Salesforce have Salesforce security experience naturally, right? It's part and parcel, but they didn't write this code. They don't really necessarily know how it's supposed to work or what it's really doing. And so it's like, okay, well, we need expertise for all these Velocity bundles. I don't know how many folks from Velocity went to Salesforce and then stayed there. And so I think what happened was there was maybe a lack of that kind of domain expertise in what they'd purchased. And, in addition to that, they were trying to really rapidly convert these code bundles into and inject them into the core platform as well. And so it's a combination of all of these things that these security issues can go unnoticed. I don't know what the velocity of what that organization had said to Salesforce, right? They could have said like, hey, we do pen tests every week. We do all of these various things. Like we've got we adhere to all these compliance frameworks. So I don't know what kind of went down, but ultimately, I just think it's an acquisition and it just slipped under the radar, and they just maybe didn't have the domain expertise to tackle and hunt for those issues. It's very, very typical when it comes to acquisitions because you're trying to like port in all this technology and you're kind of afraid to touch it because it's like, all right, we just spent a ton of money on buying this, so let's not break the core functionality of what we just bought.
Yeah. Yeah, I was working for a credit bureau when they went and purchased another, competitor or whatever it was. And it was an insane deal, but security was basically the part that was holding up, the deal getting done. And it's because I don't think that it was another credit bureau that we bought, but it was like very close. Where like they had the exact same data, and it just made a lot of business sense to purchase them. But at the same time, right, our CISO and our directors were kind of juggling with the fact that like, hey, we can't do an in-depth, analysis of this code and the products and everything because we're going to be incorporating them into our offering. Like we can't wait 3 years, right? It's got to be done in 12 months, like, and even then it's going a little bit slow for us. And so it was a risk. It was a real risk. And I think it probably still is a real risk because it was a great enough risk to where they didn't lay off anyone at that other company. They were like, yeah, you guys are doing your own thing. You're fine. Keep it going. Right. Like, didn't lay off anyone, hired more people for them. They actually kept their network completely separate. Like it was such a big deal that I had to buy like additional instances of my security tools to deploy in their environment. It was a complete separate thing, because like it said the same name, on the logo, right? But it was like that is a totally different, can of worms, right?
Yeah, I've seen some of our customers use AppOmni for M&A for that exact use case of like, hey, we're looking to kind of buy this, so we're gonna want to hook up all of their stuff to see, are we taking a huge risk on, like, do things need to be reassessed from a security perspective, like what's really the security posture of this organization from a SaaS security perspective.
I feel like that is a side of security that obviously isn't thought about a whole lot. I mean, in conjunction, obviously, with SaaS security, like we were just talking about. But when you're going to go and buy another company and you're planning on integrating that product offering tightly into your own product offering, I mean, it only makes sense to go to your vendors and say, hey, like, can we do like a 30 or a 45-day trial for this other environment over here? We're going to buy them, we'll pay you a certain amount or whatever to do it, right? Because how else are you going to like get that information? You're not going to get that information even if you do, interviews with like their internal, pen testing team or their internal blue teams or whatever it might be. Like, at the end of the day, if I want you to know something and I want to hide it, if I don't want you to know something, right, I'll hide it a whole lot
100%,
of different
right? You don't want
ways.
to risk
And
the
there's billions of dollars on the line.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm not gonna say I would do the same thing, but like I get it,
Yeah.
right? 100.
Yeah.
percent It makes a ton of sense. And to be fair, I mean, it was only like a year ago, I think, or around that time when I found out that like this was a use case for AppOmni, and I was like, oh, that makes an absolute ton of sense. I don't know why I never thought about that aspect of security. Yeah, it's very very interesting, and it kind of just ties in very very nicely with this kind of topic with the whole velocity thing, because that could be very well what had happened, right? They didn't necessarily maybe even know what they were getting themselves into, but it looks like it kind of played out very nicely for them because, as I said, the adoption of industry clouds is absolutely huge. So I think 5 0 days reported in a responsible manner is probably worth the hundreds of millions, billions that industry clouds is making them.
Right. Wow. 5 0 days. I mean, have you ever seen something like that? Have you ever put anything together, of that scale before?
Now, I haven't ever completed, and I've never really done a full kind of product analysis. Now, again, it's a product built on a product, right? So this is kind of the first of its kind for me. I'm doing like a holistic security assessment of the potential risks and also 0 days. And it was super fun. And honestly, like it took months to put together, but it was only meant to take a couple of weeks. And what happened is I'd find like maybe at first I found like five really cool things. And I'd be like, okay, I'm done now. I'm gonna put the white paper together, and I'd see like one little button. I'd be like, well, what does that do? And I'd click it, and all of a sudden, like the security shuts off or something. And so I kept finding things, and I was like, I just need to stop looking at this product so that I can actually get around to writing the research and getting these things over to Salesforce so they can see if they're 0 days or not. But I mean, when it comes to have I seen that amount of 0 days in one thing, Fortinet has like a 0 day dropped against it every 5 seconds. So I don't think it competes to Fortinet. But yeah, it was very, very fruitful. It's great to produce a bit of research that not only benefits our customers, obviously, but the overall like Salesforce community by identifying these potential foot guns and configurations and telling them how to address it, but then also helping at the vendor and being like, hey, here's some 0 days as well. So it's kind of win-win for everyone, and it's played out really nicely.
Hmm. So when you're handed this task, right? Where do you start? Because it just sounds like a monumental task, and I'm not even sure that I would know, where to start. Are you just working through the basic functionality, right, of this product offering and just iterating through it. Like, okay, well, what if I do this over here? What do I get? You know, that sort of thing.
It's and this is why it took so many months, because it's a behemoth of a task, right? And how I always when it comes to SaaS in general, how I approach these assessments, you could say, is I don't think like a security person 100% of the time. Honestly, for the first couple of weeks or for the bulk of the time, at the beginning, I think like a platform administrator. I think of, okay, how can I build this? Like, what are the configurations? How am I able to expose this and do this? And I think as if I'm trying to actually do something with the technology. And as you kind of put that into practice and start building some things, that's when you begin to notice things, because that kind of security practitioner in your subconscious doesn't turn off. So you'll see something and be like, that's kind of suspicious. And because of that approach of getting holistic knowledge of the platform and all of its features as an admin, in an admin mindset, you're so much better equipped from a security perspective, because you know the interoperability of these various features. You know what's kind of working with what, and you'll start seeing some patterns as well. So I really just approach it like a system admin and get a great understanding of the solution or technology holistically. I get a good inventory of like relevant controls, a good understanding of the use cases of the various features and various components you can build. And then once I have that kind of holistic knowledge, I start to interrogate these features kind of one by one, from a security mindset. And I'll start to like toggle off the configuration settings and play around with that kind of stuff as well. So that's generally how I would recommend anyone, like if you're even internally in an organization, want to pen test your organization's like ServiceNow or Workday or whatever it is, like your best resource is going to be the administrator of that platform. It's going to be the guy or girl who's literally living on that platform every day, right? Like that is
Right.
who you should pair with, because that's where you're getting your domain expertise and knowing where to look, because they know where the data is. They know how the platform generally operates. And then you can apply your security expertise and start to actually interrogate things. And I personally guarantee you will have far much more success, right? Having at least that pairing with someone that has that knowledge of the platform, you'll get much better results and far more findings that way. Now,
Hmm.
fortunately, I have to be both. As a security researcher, I've got to do both. I've got no ServiceNow admin to pair with. So I am the ServiceNow admin and the security researcher in my case. Yeah, that's generally my approach, my recommendation to organizations that want to do a little either security research into SaaS platforms, or if they're conducting their own internal pen tests.
Hmm. Yeah, that it's fascinating to hear you talk about it like that because, early on in my career when I was trying to get into security, right? I kind of approached it from that angle actually. I was looking at it how my customer is using this platform, how I'm using this platform, and then in the back end, I'm actually tailing various logs and I'm looking through, seeing what it's doing. And I mean that really helped me build a really strong just security foundation overall. It's something I haven't thought about in forever, right? Because it was so long ago. But it's just, it's fascinating to break down that mindset because that helps a lot of people start to like think through it like, oh, okay, that's where I would start with it. And I always tell people if you can envision it, it's a whole lot easier to actually accomplish it.
Yeah,
So
yeah. It takes, if you're someone who is a traditional like pen tester kind of red teamy individual, like there does have to be a mindset shift to get the best bang for your buck out of these assessments. And even when I joined AppOmni, I was coming from a very heavy like security engineering background, and so I had to. It took me like honestly probably 6 months to a year to kind of get into the swing of how to even start looking at these platforms in a different light, and in a light that would serve me far better when I'm kind of hunting for things.
Well, Aaron, before I let you go, how about you tell my audience, where they can find you, where they can find AppOmni, and where they can find that really interesting research paper if they wanted to read through it.
Yeah, absolutely. So you can find me on LinkedIn under Aaron Costello, or Twitter at Conspiracy Proof, all one word. Um, Actually, you can find AppOmni at appomni.com. Got a ton of resources there. Most interestingly to your audience would be the AO Labs kind of little section of the AppOmni blog. That's where you'll find the industry clouds research. It's where you'll find historically all the research that I've been doing into SaaS security. So appomni.com and check out the AO Lab section. and you'll have all the resources that you need there.
Awesome. Well, all the links will be in the description of this video. Thanks again, Aaron, and I hope everyone watching, really enjoyed this podcast. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Joe.